Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of our Wilson Institute Speaker Series, Self-Isolation Edition. If you've missed the first 2 episodes, please check out our blog or McMaster's Faculty of Humanities YouTube page. A few updates: my hair is still growing at a ridiculously rapid pace. However, I think I'm about a couple of weeks away from a glorious man bun, so it's not all bad news. And at the time of recording this, babysitters are now allowed to work in Ontario. So if anyone wants to babysit 2 extremely quiet and totally not hyperactive young boys, while my partner and I escape, go out for a quick walk, please let me know. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce Jodey Nurse, one of our assistant professors here at the Wilson Institute. Before arriving at the Institute, she was a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of History at the University of Waterloo. Jodey is currently researching the history of Canada's dairy, egg, and poultry industries, and central to her work is the examination of the polarized agricultural policies that have emerged in the 20th and 21st centuries. Today, Jodey is going to talk to us about something quite on point: food security and COVID-19. So, if like me, you worry about your dwindling stash of Doritos, this lecture is for you. And now, without any further ado, let's go.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jodey Nurse, and I am an assistant professor with the Wilson Institute for Canadian History at McMaster University. Broadly speaking, I am interested in the history of agriculture and food policy, the gender dynamics of farming and farm communities, and rural society at large. Today, however, I have the pleasure of providing a short discussion of how recent events surrounding COVID-19 have triggered both interest in and fears about our present food systems, and how the past may help us contextualize some of the issues we've experienced, as well as help us consider what changes might result in a post-pandemic world. I am calling this a discussion because rather than an extended lecture, which some of our other Wilson Institute speakers have provided, for this self-isolation edition, I've decided on a more short, informal conversation of some recent events and some connections we can make to the past that I hope are informative or at least stimulate some interest and further discussion. Now, in Canada, like elsewhere around the globe, questions are being asked about the strength of the food supply chains that see our food reach our forks every day. Numerous articles have been and continue to be published about the effect this crisis is having on our food systems. Some authors have focused on the strength of domestic and global supply chains in an attempt to calm fears. While they recognize some cracks in supply chains exist, they generally believe that present systems are resilient and have served us well. Others, however, are pointing to how this coronavirus is causing serious labor shortages and border closings that are impeding complex distribution networks in an increasingly globalized food system. Some note how fewer reserves of food exist because just-in-time logistics are privileged as measures of efficiency and competitiveness. Moreover, there are those who believe that the current pandemic has highlighted how we tend to undervalue the labor of those who work in our food systems and rely on global trade to the detriment of local production of important foodstuffs. If we focus back on Canada, it is reported that ample supplies of agricultural produce remain. So there is no lack of raw product, so far anyway, but the problem is ensuring a stable and large enough workforce to harvest and process it. For example, in terms of processing, the meat industry was thrown into chaos and crisis when Cargill's processing plant in High River, Alberta, closed for a time after it became the scene of Canada's largest single-site outbreak of COVID-19. To understand why the closure of one plant, even for a short period of time, can have such a significant effect, we should consider the past. Cargill is a transnational corporation. It has incredible market power in the industry. And this really began, at least in Canada anyways, in the late 1980s with the signing of the Canadian-United States Free Trade Agreement. After this free trade agreement, massive consolidations took place. and US agribusiness corporations moved north, including Cargill, which resulted in the disappearance of several medium-sized Canadian firms. So what we had was a concentrating of processing. And certainly this was a concentration of processing like never before. While praised by some at the time for, increased efficiency, we can clearly see problems that can occur when so much processing capacity is consolidated. That one Cargill plant reportedly represents 36% of Canada's beef processing capacity. Similarly, corporate concentration also resulted in hog processing. Today, because of COVID-19, reduced plant processing capacities have resulted in serious backlogs and calls from pork farmers for immediate government aid. Even our supply managed industries have not been spared significant disruption during this time. Farmers who produce supply managed commodities like eggs, poultry, and dairy benefit from a system that can adjust production levels in a coordinated way. But the perishability of the product and the processing involved, as well as the time it takes to make those production shifts, are important. For instance, while chicken farmers are able to respond more quickly to changes in demand because of the shorter growing cycles, dairy farmers can't simply stop their cows from producing milk. In dairy, when processors can't handle a supply of milk, or they can't divert it to new markets, which was the case diverting it from the food industry market to sales and grocery stores, some milk removal was necessary. Of course, Canadian dairy farmers were not alone in this. Dairy farmers around the globe were forced to dump milk during these unprecedented times. So this is not a reflection of the supply management system in Canada, despite what some would have you believe. And fortunately for Canadian farmers, unlike many of their international counterparts, coordinated efforts could be made and losses shared across the sector due to the structure and administration of supply management. While many farmers around the globe suffered incredible loss or had to be supported by direct government payments. Indeed, historically, perhaps no other commodity has suffered more volatility in the 20th century than milk, and that is why the creation of supply management in the first place. By the 1960s, after chronically low prices and volatility in the dairy market for decades, fairer farmer pricing and production discipline was introduced, and the foundations for a national system of supply management were laid in order to stabilize the industry. Now, it is worth noting that not all farmers are experiencing the pandemic's effects in the same way. Farmers who produce less perishable products like pulses are mostly doing well, mainly because they can be stored indefinitely once canned or dried. Also, production is highly mechanized, and they depend less on food service industry for sales. Also, because pulses are non-perishable goods, demand has increased as consumers plan for fewer trips to the grocery store and as they stock up their pantries. For similar reasons, Canada's wheat farmers are also reportedly faring well during these times. In contrast, North American potato farmers are suffering because large percentages of their sales go directly to the food service industry, and at-home purchases have simply not been able to make up the difference. Given the upheaval COVID-19 has caused for some, and certainly the uncertainty it has caused for all, this pandemic has encouraged us to reflect on whether or not a globalized food system is really meeting our needs. Stories of food waste around the globe, around the world, this is an issue in normal times, but certainly one that is of particular concern right now, are galvanizing people around future food policy change. Having been recently working on the topic of food waste in the past, I can tell you that no matter the circumstances, when food is wasted while many go hungry, citizens respond with outrage and protest. When we look back at some of the most significant events that led to changes in our food systems, We see a host of reasons, but typically some sort of crisis facilitated a desire or simply a necessity for change to occur. Whether that was war, which, as the First and Second World Wars have shown, facilitated measures to ensure food supplies and price stability through the creation of price and ration controls, or times of severe economic and economic depression and natural disasters such as the Great Depression, when the Agricultural Adjustment Act was signed into law in the US and the Natural Farm Products Act of 1934 in Canada. These acts were meant to help alleviate economic and social upheaval. And of course, the introduction, as I mentioned before, of a national supply management system was created to address disparities in market power, these disparities that existed, especially between farmers and processors and distributors. It also sought to deal with chronic issues related to overproduction and rising costs. Later on, neoliberal reforms began in an effort to reduce government assistance in farm and food sectors, although often these actions simply resulted in additional ad hoc measures in times of crisis in the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s. Shifting agricultural and food policies and programs have often been the result of economic crises, crop failures, food safety and security concerns, and unusual global events. But they have also been made in response to the emergence of new technologies and ideologies that have changed the farming landscape, especially in the post-war period. This is not the first pandemic, nor will it likely be the last, and food shortages and insecurity, farmer hardship, food waste, consumer unrest, these are also not new. But we do live in a time where neoliberal policy changes have altered the landscape of our food systems. Many of these changes were actively pursued in the 1980s and have accelerated into the 21st century, where we have witnessed the weakening, if not collapse, of more collectivist farm programs and groups. The problems supply chains have experienced under unusual distress are one thing, but the larger inequalities that have also been made more apparent to the public during this time are another. Certainly, alternate food movements are increasing in popularity, and food sovereignty proponents seek a new policy paradigm, one in which food is a human right, production works with the natural ecological processes and preserves the environment, local food systems are preserved and developed, and farmers should be able to earn a living. Will this pandemic be a catalyst for significant change? Will increased calls for self-sufficiency result in any discernible transformations where local food systems are bolstered and protected? What will the post-pandemic world look like? Only time will tell, but we should look to the past to help us understand why food systems look the way they do and to help inform us about what changes should be made to those systems to make them more resilient in the future. So to that end, I would like to encourage all of you to visit the Wilson Institute webpage and learn more about a recent call for papers that we issued for a workshop we'll be hosting next year called Fighting Scarcity and Creating Abundance, the Politics of Food in Canadian History and Beyond. This workshop will explore themes of food scarcity and abundance, and we're seeking papers that address these broad themes, as well as some more specific themes as they relate to a Canadian and transnational context. So these more specific themes could include, but certainly aren't limited to, famine and migration, food shortages, hunger and poverty, food waste and supply chains, overproduction of foodstuff, export commodities versus local produce, free markets versus agricultural protectionism, domestic versus global food supplies, consumer protests and organizations, farmers' organizations and movements, the political economy of food, and cultural foodways. For more information about this workshop and all the work we do at the Wilson Institute for Canadian History, Please visit our website at wilson.humanities.mcmaster.ca or email us at wilsonch, that's Wilson, WILSONCH @mcmaster.ca. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time, and stay well.